My name is Corey Byer, and I'm a trainer with Crime Reports, but primarily I am a police officer in Texas, where I've been in law enforcement for 11.5 years. I started in county corrections and then moved to county patrol. Now I work in a municipality. So I've experienced both sides of those law enforcement coins, which I think are pretty significant differences. But now I work for a municipality. We have 83,000 residents, about 110 sworn officers, and we take about 6,000 offense reports a year. So we take in a lot of information, and I am the crime analyst now, so it's my job to process that information. I am very thankful for Command Central for, I guess, some selfish reasons. It helps me save time in processing. There are no longer a stovepipe of requests that get log jammed where I'm not able to work as quickly as I would like to. But in a broader perspective, I am impressed with Command Central because what I'm seeing in law enforcement is a shifting of these policing paradigms. They're all very much now dependent upon information, from community policing to information-led policing to CompStat. They're all very data-driven. And additionally, we're seeing the decentralization of authority to lower levels of the organization, where we expect them to react or be proactive against crime. We expect them to be more efficient, and this also in a time when the economy is not doing well and departments are laying off, and yet we're still seeing the same expectations of service levels. So Command Central is also following in the lines of the information age, what we're seeing with that, where information is no longer stored in these knowledge silos, rather it's distributed very easily and very quickly. So some examples we can see are the Scottrade commercials where they talk about their dashboard analytics. Dashboard analytics is a popular tool because it conveys a lot of information graphically, but very fast and very efficiently. So I think also in law enforcement what we see a lot of is what I just spoke to an IT guy today, and he described it as the glossy magazine syndrome, where we find a glossy magazine that has the technology advertised in it, and we say, wow, I've got to have that. But we don't put a whole lot of thought into how are we going to use it. And my agency is struggling with automatic license plate readers right now, and how are we going to use them. So partly what we're going to talk about is the functionality of what Command Central does, but also as we go through it and we look at some of these charts and graphs, we'll talk briefly about how to use that in your organization. What information is it communicating to you, and what are some ways you can use it? I do teach another class called Tactical Crime Analysis using Command Central. That is much more directed towards how to use your program, how to use Command Central for fighting crime. That's not what this class is going to be today, but please sign up for the next Tactical Analysis if you're interested. So we'll begin by talking about this top bar up here. This is it's visible no matter what screen you move through. And the first hyperlink is the My Account. So this is where you can change your username and password. Pretty standard, just pretty self-explanatory as we look at it. The default regions, you can select this agency here that we're looking at. There are multiple agencies that report to the same database, to the same server. So technically we could probably view all of these other agencies, but what is the default wants and needs of the officer? Probably just the agency that we work for, which is this one here. And as we scan down, we can see we can select the default beat. All of these beats are related to these agencies here, and I don't care to see all those. I'm only interested in the beats that are related to my agency, so we highlight those. The other notable feature here is the user role, officer or observer. We'll see later in the roll call tab where we can post and view comments. The officer role allows you to post. The observer is only for viewing. And we'll also see this throughout each chart and graph, the how does this work hyperlink. When we click on it, a real attractive PDF comes up, and it tells us specifically, it's specifically related to the screen that we're viewing, that hyperlink is embedded in. So as we can see, it's not a long user manual that we have to surf through the index to try to find out what we're looking at. It's specifically related to the window, which I think is a pretty expedient and very helpful way of looking at it. Next, this user account here is related to an admin, or it's only viewable for an admin. And this is where we can create individual users, or we can batch create a user. And this would be a good way if you had access to the employee database and you could structure a query that would produce a text file just like this. That would work. And it would be pretty quick. I wasn't able to do that. I had to use users, create individual users. So we could search for username or email address and hit search and we find it. Or if we're uncertain of what it is, we can hit search. That's an open parameter which displays all usernames and passwords. And we can come in here and edit username passwords. If an officer forgets what their password was, we can change it back. The training hyperlink is how we got here, so I think we're pretty adept at finding out how to use this. This is the next tactical analysis class is coming up. Next, help, which is I don't think as helpful as the hyperlinks, but it can tell you the user guide, a video walkthrough, and how to get the support at crime reports. So next we're going to talk about each one of these tabs across the top here, but we're going to start in dashboard and we're going to walk through each one of these so you can see how to use them. Each chart and graph has the selection up at the top, so we can hit save and it's going to produce a PDF, and if we hit open, we'll see that it's specifically the chart that we're looking at. You'll notice though that there is a lot of dead space in here, so it doesn't paste into a PowerPoint very well, but there's a workaround to that. If I put the cursor in that graph, it highlights it blue, copy image, and then I'm going to open up Microsoft Paint, Control-V, paste it into Paint, and then when we save this, we can save this Paint file into a PDF real easy. So it's a little bit of a multi-step process, but considering the length of time it would take to actually generate this from some kind of RMS query is not too bad. The payoff's not that bad. We can hit print and print this graph. We can hit map, and what this map does is displays to us all the information that's in this graph in a visual map. So if we were to count however many incidents were in beat 5, they would match up to the total that's in this bar here. Next is the data view, and the data view displays the information, but it's in a spreadsheet view. So if we look LCB4, we see there's greens and whites and a yellow, and what the yellow is telling us is that's the high count for this row. So there's 24 other offenses was the high count for beat 4. And this yellow here tells us the high count is for this column. That statistics isn't spectacular, but what is spectacular about it is if you click on this cell, then you're produced a list of what those categories were. So let's go back to here and see, I don't like those. Let's look at assaults. So when I expand this out, you can see this is beat 4 assaults for the time period that we were looking at. And when I click on that 11, it produces a list of what made up that 11 count. And we're going to talk about this in a moment, but I can switch the views and go to export. So as we're going through this, I'm going to show you the different locations where you can export. Just try to remember that because later we'll really get into how to export. But it doesn't match up if I do it now. So I used to not really like this chart, but the more I think about it, the more I do enjoy how this works. By being able to view this and go into export, you're really able to, it's the drill down process, really explore your data. So along the x-axis, rather, we see counts of crimes, and the y is locations. Each chart and graph also has these 4 filter selections. So we can open up the date and we can say either 2 methods here. 1, show me the last 12 months and hit apply. Or 2, we could say show me everything in June 1st, to June 30th and hit apply. Now, you also may notice that the canned selections, these pre-formatted selections, the largest time frame is last 12 months. But you may have, for instance, my agency, I can't remember the exact year, I think we move 3 years worth of data. So we could really look at this up to 3 years ago. But that selection isn't in here. So just be mindful that you should understand what information you're sending them, and you could do that customized selection through these tabs right here. Next also is the areas. So we looked at the default areas earlier, and perhaps if I'm a West Side sergeant or commander, then I'm only concerned about these 3 beats, and I can select just those 3 beats. Depends upon your perspective in the organization, probably what you're going to be concerned about a little bit than others. So if I were a patrol officer, although this doesn't make much sense graphically, I would only maybe be concerned about LCB1 or maybe the surrounding beats. Not that I don't care what's going on everywhere else, but I'm held accountable for what goes on in my beat, so that's what I need to be concerned about. Also, crime types. We can select the individual crime types that we want. Sometimes this gets a little bit tricky depending upon what type of information you're sending to Crime or to Command Central. So these all caps categories are hard-coded into the system, and they can't be changed. But you can break out offense categories that you feel are important to your organization. So for instance, burglary of a building in the state of Texas and burglary of a habitation, they're distinguished by statute. That makes them different by statute and penalties. Now, not only is it different by statute and penalties, it's also a different type of offense that I don't want to see grouped together. Because in my jurisdiction, probably yours too, a burglary of a habitation is going to occur in a residential area during the daytime on a weekday. And a burglary of a building will probably be a storage shed or a convenience store or some type of business that is closed after hours. If I'm trying to assess some type of pattern that I can intervene in, I don't want to view these all together. I want to be able to separate them out so I can assess them individually. So for those reasons, and burglary of a building and habitations are problems for this jurisdiction, they were separated out. Now, you'll know, homicides, in Texas, there are also various levels of homicides, but it's not so important for this agency to separate show me criminally negligent homicides, separate those from manslaughter, separate those from capital offenses. It's not as relevant for this agency to do that, so all of those were lumped together in homicide. Now, why I say sometimes this can be a little bit tricky is I have seen some agencies that will break out all of their offenses. There's always the risk of running the risk of being overly specific or too general. So you've got to find that happy balance that will not be too specific or too general. And there's problems with being too specific if there's too many offenses here, because what ends up happening is it takes a long time to search through these individually and find which ones you're concerned about. Whereas if I can just expediently move through here and say, I'm concerned about all assaults, and no, I'm not all, I'm just doing habitations, or these. So it makes it faster. And what I have found is the end user, the officers who are going to be using this are probably going to want something that is easier to maneuver through rather than something harder. Because even in my agency is a very progressive agency, and I'm very proud of the work we do, but even sometimes I find that some officers will try to find a reason not to use it. We kind of want the program, so we kind of want to mitigate that a little bit. Also, there's been a lot of creative work done to include CAD information. And what I'm impressed with is that, for instance, my agency has 2 different databases, one for RMS, the records, and one for CAD. Regardless of that, Command Central can integrate these two different databases into one location. I thought that was pretty cool. There's also, again, there's the risk of being specific in general with CAD calls. So I've seen some agencies that have every single nature code displayed in there, and to me that just becomes really difficult to navigate around. You'll see here quality of life. There is not a call for, like an officer is not going to get dispatched to quality of life call, but he or she would get dispatched to maybe a loud noise, any type of trash, abandoned vehicle, any type of nature code that may qualify as a quality of life issue. All of those were grouped together in this one category. Also, there are many different animal control related nature codes, request for a trap, animal in a trap, loose dog, vicious dog. All of those were grouped together into this one category. There's also the prefix CAD, and it's also, I've seen agencies that intermingle CAD with incident, and again, it makes it difficult to surf through there and select only the incident or only the case. So what I would say is, if you're thinking, what I like is that it's all in this one area, and it's grouped together nicely, and it's also at the end, so it's not intermingled. So, but again, some agencies have done some really creative stuff that I've been impressed with to include CAD. So,
can I ask a question?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. And let me say, at any moment, if there's a question, please interrupt me. Go ahead.
You're going in explaining this area here, and that's what I had wrote down to ask about, was the difference between the calls coming through CAD and being mapped, and then versus what we're doing is the officers' incident reports are generating the mapping.
Right.
But I didn't know that you could do both. So these calls, these CAD calls, those are things that the dispatchers are sending to the officers that don't result in an incident report. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, it could be that a suspicious person call or a disorderly conduct call does result in an arrest or something like that. Yeah. But you see, when I do this, when I deselect them, that doesn't really necessarily matter, because if it did result in an arrest, it's in an offense report and it's over here. So I'm not counting it twice, if that makes sense. So yeah, and it's also dependent upon what your needs are. Some people are using Command Central as like a accountability or a productivity measurement. So it may be nothing. They view it as a way to assess who is doing more work than others, or who is being productive and who is not being productive. So again, it's based on what your needs are. I would just say, try to find a way that is not going to clutter it and not going to confuse it, and have fun, exploring different ideas, because it's pretty versatile for what you may need.
Well, I want to be able to show the public or whoever asks, the difference between how much the officers do, and if they look at the crime mapping, they see what the officers done incident reports on. Mm-hmm. And they answer around 12,000 to 14,000 calls of service a year, but only a quarter of those or less turn into incidents.
Right. Yeah, and there's all kinds of research on what do police officers really do, service related or crime fighting related. So those statistics sound about right. I think it's about 7 to 1, 7 calls for service for 1 offense report. So yeah, I mean, I think you could find a way to display that. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. I didn't know you could do that. I thought it had to be one or the other, either generate it through CAD or generate it through incident reporting. But that's nice.
No, I'd just be careful about how you arrange it.
Right.
So next we look at this LTV4 and we see 912, and the question may be 912 what, or 832 what. Command Central has a function called drill down, and it's available in the majority of the charts and maps that we see. So here, when I put my cursor on the end of this bar, we see this little dot, or I could actually do it anywhere. I'm going to double click in that bar, and we're drilling down into the data. And what this is going to tell us is how much or what type of offenses are making up that 832 count. Here's an example of what you need to be careful about by adding too many offense categories in here.
Yeah.
The chart length does not adjust. What does adjust is the font of your labels.
Right.
Now that is not readable to me. So the way around that is move the cursor at the end of these bars, and we can see what that category makes up. I think that's going to be a fix, a workaround that they're going to be that they're working on for the next version. Although I can't necessarily speak for them, I think this has certainly been identified, and I think they're doing their best to work on it. So again, we can drill down even further. If we say, boy, the number of sets in this area seems a little bit outrageous to me, I'm going to double-click on that, and this produces a time frame. Time on the X, count on the Y, and what we would do is we'd say, this is a high point. I wonder why that's a high point. 33 incidents in a month. We double-click on it again, and we're drilling down. We get the description of the events. And what we would do is we'd say, show me any similarities. Or we would ask ourselves, what are the patterns in this data that's telling me there's something I can do? And already I'm seeing 28, 25 South Gulf Freeway. These are different case numbers. A white female. I mean, if we had her information, so we've seen one pattern, 3100 Gulf Freeway. Maybe another pattern. There's another 30. So what we're doing again, crime is not randomly distributed throughout your jurisdiction. It follows patterns. It follows trends. So what we have to do is use this information that we're given here to find patterns and trends, something we can work on.
Corey?
Yes, sir.
Okay, quick question. So on that last screen right there, you have post comments and view comments. Does that allow officers to put information where they believe there might be suspect information or whatever the case may be?
Yes, that does do that. Yes. And that's also where the observer and the officer distinction comes in, where an observer can only see, an officer can post. We'll just go ahead and talk about this screen now. Look, in this screen here, it would probably be better. Let me come back to that, because we're going to talk about how to use all that in this roll call setting, and we're going to talk about exporting and different ways to view that in just a moment. But yes, that would be a place to do that. We've drilled down into this. We'll look at this comparison by crime type, and we kind of just saw this chart here, but this is for all areas of the jurisdiction. But we could single this out for just one area. Look at it again. We'd say, what are the majority offenses? Drill down into it and see what patterns are available to us. Here's a pattern already, 3045 West. These are different case numbers. This is one burglar. So again, we just by drilling down pretty quickly, I mean, we're seeing these patterns jump out at us. And this is not a training database either. This isn't set up for me to show you how easy. This is actually a live database. So again, we've got all these different crime types we can go through. We kind of already talked about this chart and this one just by drilling down. Let's get into time of day, day of week. This chart here sends my officers into fits because it's just packed so full of information that it really becomes, it looks complicated, but it's easy. Especially my agency has a lot of former military like myself. So what I try to explain this to them is it's like a grid contour map. In the military, you had the grid lines and the contour lines. As they got steeper, you knew your walk up the hill was going to be more difficult. This doesn't use contour lines. What it uses is coloration. So as we move closer to red, we have a higher concentration of crime. So to read this, what we're saying is this blob here occurred Monday at 5 p.m. Here's the 5 p.m. We go across Monday. So it's 24 hours of the day on the X, day of the week on the Y. And so this blob here occurred on Monday at 22 or 10 p.m. There are some limitations to this chart. This chart requires a specific date and time. So for instance, it's saying, by reading this, Monday at 2200 hours, there were 8 events. Now that may be incorrect, and here's why. Generally, there are 2 different types of offenses. personal crimes and property crimes. Crimes against a person, such as robbery or assault, we generally know exactly when the assault occurred, or we can say it, within an hour when a victim was punched, because the victim is there to tell you that Johnny punched me at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. here. So we write that in our report, and we can use that date and time because it's pretty specific. With property crimes, what we generally find, especially, for instance, in my jurisdiction, a person will come home at 7 p.m., leave their laptop, iPhone, handgun, and purse in the car, unlocked in the driveway. They'll then go inside, go to bed, wake up at 7 a.m., and find that their vehicle was burglarized. So when we write our reports, we say generally there was the time 1, which is 7 p.m., and the time 2, which is 7 a.m. And so when we try to assess that, we don't know when the crime occurred because the crime span is 12 hours long. So the crime could have occurred anywhere between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., which is much different than the assault or robbery. This chart uses, and I say that my terminology is time 1 is 7 p.m. in the example that we gave, and time 2 is the 7 a.m. In the example that we gave. This chart uses time 1, 7 p.m. So it works for an assault because time 1 is still generally going to be Monday at 2200 when I got punched, and time 2 is Monday at 2210 when the suspect left after punching me. So time 1 works pretty well for that, for offenses of robbery or personal crimes. It doesn't work well for property crimes. Now, there is a workaround. So what I'm telling you is be cautious of what you're seeing if you view property crimes in this chart. There is a workaround to this. There have been suggestions made to Command Central to adjust for this. There are different ways to assess a crime time span with a relative degree of accuracy. And let me say also, though, that this is not a Command Central crime reports problem. This is a practitioners and researchers problem. Nobody has found the magic key that's going to unlock this secret for that 12 hours. There are different ways to use analysis to determine that, and I think that Command Central is going to be assessing some of these different ways so that we can make these charts and graphs more reliable. Now, overall, this chart is designed to tell you when. You see all these other charts can tell you what, and when we drill down, we get a map, and it tells you where. And when we read the officer narratives or the posted comments, we can see the who, but this chart tells you the when, the date and time. In the tactical analysis class, I teach a way to use Microsoft Excel to overcome this limitation, and so this is a workaround that's very easy and simple to do, something we can all learn. Are there any questions about the time of day, day of week chart? No? Okay. Crime by date. This is a timeline that gives you a count of incidents per beat or per district. So what I like to use this chart for, and let me give you the example here. We're looking at 30 days, but let's say we use the canned 3 days. Now, this chart doesn't tell me anything when I look at this time span for 3 days. What I think this chart works best for is a larger date range. So I'm going to say the last 12 months. And when I hit apply, we'll see that it communicates something much more understandable. But it's still a little bit crowded for me, my liking. So what I prefer to do is adjust these down. I like to look at them beat by beat. And so what we can do here is assess a longer time pattern and get more of a trending idea. So I think this chart works better for a strategic outlook in crime reduction. So when I see what I would be concerned about is high points from 5/11 to 6/11, 91 incidents. When I drill down, we'll see exactly what type of incidents are making up this high point, and we can go to we can do the export, which we'll talk about in just a moment still. So, but this would be a way to assess what that high point is What can we anticipate next month? Should we adjust our forces to address these issues as they come up? So, was there a question? Nope.
I've got one, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah. No, please.
The way we're going to have to utilize this mapping for our jurisdiction is our community, our jurisdiction is broken up into communities, and each community is an individual.
Right.
You know, they have
area.
monthly community meetings, and they want to know what kind of things are going on in their community. Now, we recently adopted a zone coverage, but our zone coverage does not reflect the community boundaries.
Right.
Is there a way to do both, where we can do a breakdown by community and we can do a breakdown by zone?
I think that is I can't speak specifically about the technical workings of whether or not that can be done. But I believe that if you have a GIS shapefile somewhere that outlines what your neighborhoods are, then it can be loaded into here. Because I have seen agencies that have beats and sub-beats in their selections here. So
we have our shapefiles. We got them to IT there at Crime Reports, and he helped us with them, and we have our GIS guy working with them. So they have our communities and zones.
Yeah.
So,
then I would speak with them and find out if they can do it. I think the possibility is very high, but I can't speak for them, so I don't know for sure. But please do engage them with that. I'm sure they'd be glad to help.
great.
You know, again, I would progress through here looking zone by zone to find out what's going to be going. Wow, what is this about? 114 incidents in New Year's, Christmas. We were down Christmas, so I don't know what this is about. But I would come through here, and I guarantee you there's, what is this? Different case numbers, different.
Vehicle is big.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, but again, these are examples of what you would do. You'd see these high points and just, you know, it's just a question. What in the heck is going on over there? Drilling down into the information produces the finite data where you can make some assessments about what's going on. Okay, next is roll call. This is the starting point for most users of Command Central, I think, because it is maps do a great job of communicating a lot of information very quickly and very easily. So this map tells me what and where very easily. On top of that, it's done in Google Maps, which I think is wonderful because Google Maps is widely used, very accurate, and aesthetically it's attractive, and it is easy to use. So we're seeing what and where very quickly. We can pan left or right using these toggles up here, or zoom out and in using these buttons here. Additionally, I can double-click into an area and zoom in. I just double-clicked into this space right here, and it zoomed in. Or I can pan by putting the mouse cursor, clicking and holding, and shifting the mouse left or right, up and down. We have also the satellite view, which I think is important really to look at. If you find something that you believe is a pattern, then it certainly doesn't hurt to look at that pattern geographically through satellite imagery, because let me move to the hybrid mode, and what you'll see in the hybrid mode is we get satellites and road. So for instance, I've seen in Command Central a pattern of business burglaries along this roadway here. Let me zoom in. All along these roadways, all on the north side of Main Street, none on the south side. Now the distribution of businesses is, you know, more heavily on the north side of the road than the south side, but there's still some good lifts over here that could have been had and weren't. So in looking at this, all on one side of the road, all within a few days, it's very easy for a person to walk back through here. And so the idea is, a vehicle could have hit both sides of the road. A person would walk on one side of the road and make these hits. So the action plan addresses pedestrian stops in this area late at night. That's So let's talk about the this left bar here. What we're looking at is, let me do this first. Sometimes you may find a new user will come into a map that looks like this blue screen. That's the first thing they see. And it may be confusing as to figure out what's going on. You'll say something's got to be broke. The fix to this, and I just discovered this by having chance, is to click on this map button. And it's going to zoom the map, it's going to focus the map right over the center of the icon that you clicked on. So even if you're way over here and you're scrolling down reading this, you say, man, this property offense looks interesting, but how am I supposed to find that amongst these thousands of events? If you hit map, it's going to center it right there, right above it. I think that's great. Also, if we click the case number, we see the officer's narrative in here. My jurisdiction is lucky enough to work with an RMS system that is easy to access from the backside. So we are able to draw the entire officer's report and put it into this narrative here. This is not including supplements, just the initial officer's report. So this is also a place to begin looking for a who. When we're thinking about what patterns are we looking for, if we found a pattern, something we could do something with, we got to find out who that is. One way to do that is to look for partial license plates or partial names, suspect descriptions that would be available in the narratives. If I click on this, we close that expanded view. This, again, where we can post and view comments, and if you'll notice, this agency does not use that function very much. So I don't really know why, but we don't.
What kind of things would you put in there that you wouldn't go attached to the incident itself?
You know,
if it was contact information, it seems like you'd go put that in the incident.
Well, some agencies are not able to draw their narratives across. So for that, it would be good to put narratives in, or some kind of information in here. I think that would be a good usage. Some agencies, though, may find that they don't, this does not communicate with your RMS. So if you post something in here, it's not going to reflect in your report back in the RMS system. So I think that's probably why my agency is very focused on centralizing information in RMS, and I think that may be the reason. But
yeah, I mean, just looking at it from what little bit I know about it, I mean, I would feel like I would prefer our officers, to go to the incident and do a supplement. Now, is this software commonly used by every officer in the agency, or just supervisors?
No, well, for our agency, again, we decentralize and we push responsibility down to the patrolmen, and so they use this, and it's them that should be surfing through this and finding information according to the philosophy of my agency. So yes, every officer has a username and password, and they are not only just strongly encouraged, but oftentimes mandated during shift briefing to talk about their beat, what happened in the past 7 days of their area, which leads me to this. I said that most maps and graphs have this selection viewable somewhere. You'll notice that roll call does not. The way to adjust the settings for roll call is in the settings tab, and it's in here where you would adjust for crime types, dates, whatnot. Now, I also suggest that depending upon one way to look at it, depending upon shift, what kind of shifts you're working, 8 hours or 12s or 10s, would probably depend upon what kind of selection you use here. If you're working 8, you're on 5 days a week, you're off 2, so you're pretty much aware of what's going on more regularly. You could use a 3-date selection, and what that's going to do is minimize the amount of icons, less clutter, and I think it may make it easier to view. If you're on 12s, maybe you would want to look at 7 days, because you have probably, depending upon the rotations, you may have 3 or 4 days off. 7 days will cover that span. So any selections must be done there. Now let's talk about the spreadsheet. I've kept talking about this, and what this does is we went from this view with this data, and it just moves it to a spreadsheet kind of view here, which is not as user-friendly for viewing, but we can then export. So when I hit export, we create a PDF file, an Excel file, data file, because I've done this before. It's on the desktop. When I open it up, we can see that what happened is all that information that was in that spreadsheet is now in Excel, including the entire officer's narrative. Why I think this is important. Some RMS systems won't even give you access to the backside of their database because they say it's proprietary. If you're in that situation, or if you're thinking about buying a new RMS, I say run away from those vendors as quickly as possible. Second, even if you do have access to the table structure of your database, it requires Microsoft Access, Cognos, or Crystal Report, or any other kind of back-end reporting software, which requires a user who knows how to use it, a person who is trained in that program, who's experienced enough to draw that information out, and then also isn't hounded daily with requests for information. What Command Central done, I think maybe even unknowingly what they've done, is created a backdoor to your RMS that is easy to use and available to everybody. So we've completely destroyed any need for all these complex programs, and we've made it move to Excel, which is, in the analysis world, a widely used program, very robust and just wonderful. So some examples of what we could do. I'm going to insert a column in here, and I want to know what, I've got these date time fields, but I want to separate the hour. So I would say hour is a column name. These are, whoops, equals, and so I can see here now this is the hour that this occurred. And we can just go, you can go on and on and on with these time assessments. We could even search for suspect descriptions, streets, or if I wanted to look at a different crime category, I'd say show me only from vehicles, and we get those fields in there where we could do further analysis. So a great tool, wonderful to use, but again, it opens the door to a whole lot of possibilities. So next, let's just filter. We can filter different words that we're looking for. So if I wanted to say, I need to see anything with the word dog in it. From the narrative and from the information up here, we move everything and it shows only dog. I want to cancel that search out, and I want to see anything with a Toyota. And so these are all the incidents with a Toyota. Or I know that Sean is a bad guy. I just saw his name. There's a couple different Seans in there. So we can clear that out. Next, we can sort by either crime category, who wrote the report, the case number. I like date because it puts the newer events up top, and it's just easier to process that way. I think that makes more logical sense. But again, whatever the user wants, the user can make. So are there any questions on roll call? No. Okay. Reporting. Is
there any way to the narratives are nice on the mapping descriptions?
Yes.
Apparently there's no way to, like your sex offenses and different things like that. It provides too much information. But the information is good for majority of the incidents. But it's either it's like all or none, because we live in a smaller community, and some roads only have 2 or 3 houses on them. And you know, if there's a sex assault and it says 100 block, you know.
Right. Okay. Well, you can the integration team can work on different ways to remove. But what you're speaking of is the public side, I think. And
yeah, that's correct.
The officer side, we want to see that because you know, it's the officer's taking the report anyway. But for the public side, the integration team can look at ways of manipulating that information to really obscure or removed. And my agency removed a lot of that. We just didn't even want to do it. So we don't even show sexual assault. Okay, so the reporting is your standard CompStat style report. We have offense categories, standard deviation levels, and incidents last month. So we'll start by saying, I prefer to view weekly rather than monthly. And so we see when we're on the monthly selection here, we see this is February 1st to the 28th. That's the last calendar month. We're already into the 8th day of March. So this becomes, I think, less timely. And that's no matter how you assess it. Even if it's the last 30 days, I think 30 days becomes less timely because crime patterns flare up and go away very quickly. So what I prefer is week. And when we go to week, we can see this is actually the past 7 days. It's a moving 7 days. So as we move forward in the future, it's the last 7 days. So what we see is the incident. Okay, the purpose of a CompStat report is to say what number of offenses are you having now? How does that compare to the past? And if it's outside that range, how far is it outside that range? And do we need to be concerned with it? So that works by saying incidents last week. It assesses then it then goes back in time and assesses for the past 90 days. It's saying you've had 0.4 other sexual offenses, an average a week for the past 90 days. So for the past 90 days, there's been 0.4 weekly average of these offenses. It then says, it does the mathematical results for you and says, what's the standard deviation? That is 0.5. So we use the standard deviation to assess what is the high-low range. So to assess the high-low range, what's going on is the program is saying the average is 0.4. We're going to minus 0.5. So the low end is negative 0.1. The middle is the average, which is 0.4. And the high range is 0.9. So then it says we're at 1 this week. Where does 1 fall into that average? Well, 1 is high. It's outside that 0.9, the high end. So it's saying there's a 150 variance, which is like a z-score in statistics, and it's saying graphically it's going to represent that it's saying it's a 0.1. So we can see this is average, this would be low, this would be high, and it's saying it's above average, but it's only a 0.1. So is that something we need to freak out about or not? Well, that's for you to decide. But always remember, small numbers, small changes in small numbers can produce large results. So before we start freaking out, let's look back at that average and say, we've only had a weekly average of 0.4. That's not even 1. And this week we have 1. Well, yes, it is statistically significant, but not so significant that we need to start our some kind of task force for this one event. Also, it depends upon the offense category. So let's look at drugs are 0.5. The weekly average is 21. The standard deviation is 2.7. That makes the high range 23, 24, and we had 35 this week. Well, that's statistically speaking well outside what is normal. We should not freak out about that because the reason is drugs are generally, mostly, an officer-initiated activity documented in an offense report after an arrest of some type. So if we're seeing 0.5 or +5 for drugs or even traffic, that's not alarming to me. That's a good sign because we're making a lot of arrests and we want to see these numbers go up. So again, let's think about the context of the numbers rather than just the numbers themselves. Next is Power Maps. Power Maps is it allows you to do a side-by-side comparison and to control for 3 different variables. So the different variables we can look at are maps, which are geography, crimes, and date, time. So when this is a chain link here and when it's blue, they're locked. So we can see as I move one map, they both move. If I unlock them, only one map moves. I'm in a locked geography. And crimes, if they're locked, if they're unlocked, we could deselect here or if they're locked, you see how this adjusts back. So we're going to lock these two. And dates. This is the date range on the sliding scale. So they're locked, and we'll see as I'm going backwards in time, and now I'm to today, March 1st and 7th. Now, the way that this chart works best is if you control two variables and leave a third free. And I'll show you which ones I prefer. I think it's best. When we zoom in by double-clicking here, you'll notice that these pie charts turn into individual point locations as we get close. So what I prefer is to keep date time free. And so I'm going to make this chart here go backwards in time a week, February 23rd to March 1st. And this one stayed in the current week. So what we're doing, you see that these offenses adjust as we move back in time. So what this would probably be good for is HOA or a homeowners meeting, and we'd say, we had this is the first week, and we can see there was a lot of offenses over here. And in the second week, well, we still had an offense over here, but we had fewer offenses. So your Citizens Patrol program did a great job, and we're so happy to have you with us. And we would hit this date here to make these things go back. So again, control three variables, leave one open. Next, Trendcaster. Trendcaster is commonly referred to as the weather map. And this map uses kernel density mapping to produce these hotspots. So kernel density mapping is very similar to rain maps. So for instance, let's say you have, there's a point location A and a point location B and a point location C. And each one of these locations has a rain, they collect rainwater, so they can measure how much rain has fallen. So in point A, we had 2, and point B, we had 2 inches also. That information is then shipped to the local weather station, and the weather station collects it and analyzes it. And so the weather station says, well, I don't know. I know 2 inches fell at B and 2 inches fell at A, but I don't know how much rain fell in between A and B. So what it does, the weather station will average that distance and say, well, I don't know for sure about between A and B, but the average is 2, so I'm going to say it's 2 inches fell in there. And then I'm going to color that into my map to reflect 2 inches. So we'll never know exactly how much rain falls all over the surface area of your area, but we can make these estimations and be pretty accurate about it. That's what kernel density mapping does. It's a smoothing. I think it's called I'm going to forget the term, but it's a smoothing technique. So crime is really a point location event. Now, that's depending, really. We could say that a vehicle pursuit starts where at one point, and the offense continues to occur until the point where that pursuit ends. So it could be 20 miles, we could say, that that's where the offense occurred. But we record it generally as where the offense started, where the officer initiated the traffic stop and the pursuit began. But, also we don't map where the man assaulted his wife. We don't say it occurred in the kitchen and then point location map in the kitchen. We use an address location and say it generally occurred in this area. So we don't map crime specifically even when we know exactly where it occurred. Now, all of that plays into what we're going to talk about here. Crime is a point location. So there was probably a couple incidents here and a couple incidents here. And we're using kernel density, so we're not saying that all this area had crime. What we're saying is that when we smooth it out, we average the distances, we get this amorphous blob. Kernel density mapping is, hotspot mapping, which is what we're looking at here, is a widely debated topic. There are many different statistical ways to prove whether a hotspot is accurate or not. Kernel density mapping is a common way, and I forget the exact numbers, but it's like 70, 80% accurate. The point of hotspot mapping is to say where there is past crime, there is future crime, because you remember crime is not central, it's not randomly distributed. So it concentrates in some areas more than others. So that's why we see this blob. So be careful when you look at this and don't say there must be crime all over this area. And this would apply to your homeowners association. this shouldn't freak them. Well, it will freak them out, but we got to explain to them how mapping works and what this process does. That's why I'm explaining it to you. So now we'll talk about what makes a color, what makes it warm or what makes it cold. When I double-click on the blob, we get a chart, and we see the chart time is on the X, count is on the Y. So what we're charting here is dates and incidents. So we see on this date, 12/19 of 10, there was 0 incidents. But on 1/2 of 10, there was, and remember, this isn't whole numbers because we're talking about averaging. This is, there were 0.366 events. And when we go all the way up to here, on 2/27, there were 4 events. So what happens next is a averaging. This green line is a visual representation of an average of this graph. The way to say how do you average a graph is to say I want to put a line on this graph and I want an equal number of points to be above the line and below the line. So if we were to come through here and count 1, 2, 3, that's on the line, 4, that's on the line, and then there's a point, but it's at 4, so there's 8 total above the line. And if I go through here and say there's 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 below the line. So 8 above and 8 below. This is this visual representation of the average. Now, this becomes important because what we're concerned about is the slope of this line. If the slope of the line is going upwards, like what we're seeing, then what we're saying is as time progresses into the future, the amount of crime is going up. So if we were to imaginarily extend this line out into the future, and we'd say 1028, or 228 of 11, or even 6-1 of 11, then what we'd see is this line would extend out into the future as well, and it's angling up. So we can say that on 1028, I expect to have 1 crime. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand that? Averaging, what we're concerned about is the slope of the line. Is it up or down? So here's an example of an angle of a line that is sloped downward. And what it is saying is as we progress into the future, the amount of crime is going down. So on 1028, this line would extend out too, and we're saying the amount of crime on average is going down. Now, coloration is represented by the slope of the line. So we can see in the parentheses there, it's saying the slope of the line is 0.1478. And if we look at this line, it's a negative number. The slope of the line is negative 0.122. So a negative slope is blue and a positive slope is red. On top of that, we're going to talk about now how to determine the brightness of the color. It's done right here, slope scale parameter. So if we increase this number, we'll see that these red hots become hotter and these cool spots become cooler. What we're saying then is we're adjusting. We're saying we're adjusting for the slope of the line by saying, okay, yeah, it's 1.309, but I want this to be flaming hot, so I'm going to increase this, adjust the weights for that. So what I say is just keep it at 5, which is pretty standard. Next, if you remember, we talked about that weather map example. I said there were points A, B, and C. Well, with what kernel density does is it does a search area. So it takes a point location and it does a search area out. We can increase that search area. So in the example with the range, what we'd be saying is average out the distance between A and B, but average out the difference between A and C. And if C is a great farther distance away, it's going to be collecting more information into that search radius, and it's going to be producing, well, you'll see here. We're going to increase this radius and say, show me a larger search area. And so largely what we're seeing is the whole west side of the town is just on fire. So what do they say? Lies, lies, and statistics, right? That's why I say just keep this down to 5. and I think you get a better representation of what's really going on. Next, we have these filters in here, and I'm going to put it on 30 days. Let's put it on 3 days. Okay. I just put it on the time frame, a canned search of 3 days, and we see this blue screen here. We can fix this by looking at the granularity. It's on the week scale, and we picked 3 days. A week is greater than 3 days, so what we have to do is adjust the time period down, and we'll see it's going to fix. So if you see that blue screen, adjust this feature to a time period that is less than the date filters you chose, and this will get fixed. Okay. Also, this is a good way here to see. You can't really see these spots very well, but if I increase these, you're going to see them a little bit brighter. It kind of brings them to the forefront. So that's not an example of live and statistics. That's a way to use this to help accent what you want to see. Okay? So we are at our hour time frame now. I'm going to turn it over. I'm willing to stay. I have plenty of time. If you have questions, please hit me with them. What you got? No questions? None? Okay.
I guess we have to be careful not to, I mean, if we address a problem in an area, those numbers are going up. It's not the crime's going up, but the reporting is going up.
Right. You know, again, it's about the interpretation of the numbers. Don't let the numbers tell you something, but you have to understand really what they mean in the real world. So, you know, we see that all the time with, I mean, 9 out of 10 dentists prefer Colgate. I mean, okay, so there's one guy out there that, you know, I mean, don't brush your teeth. I'm the dentist that says don't brush your teeth with Colgate. I mean, I don't get it. But, you know, an example, interpret the numbers better.
Right. Is there anyone else in here today using Southern software? Is there another agency using that?
That's using what type of software?
Southern software. It's called the Sheriff Pack, Police Pack. I was just going to, if anyone was using that, I was going to ask them a couple questions. But
no, I don't know.
We, there's a section in there for activity logs and crime mapping, crime reports. It won't pull the information out of that section of the RMS because it's just like an activity log. If you do a foot patrol or you do something that doesn't require an incident report, you put it in there.
Oh, so it's like an out of service code or something.
Yeah, it's like if you do a foot patrol of a park or you're in your car and you patrol a patrol request somewhere, you wouldn't do an incident report on it. You put it in your officer activity log. But the crime mapping is not pulling that out because
okay. Let me ask you this: does it have a geo field, an address field that is geo verified, or is it just a kind of free form text that you could put anything in there that you wanted for the address?
It's a free form text for your address.
Okay. That may be one reason. I'm really just kind of guessing. I mean, have you spoken to them about that though?
No, I've not spoken to Southern Software. I've been playing around with crime reports for about a month now and trying to figure out what our limitations are and everything. You know, what I've been waiting on this training and the tactical analysis training before we really start calling Southern Software and saying, hey, this is something that we'd like to see change, because I don't know if it's something that we just don't understand how to use yet or if it's a limitation of the software.
Right. Have you talked to the integration team at Crime Reports to see if they were able to find a workaround for what you were hoping to do?
Yeah, I've talked to them quite a bit, and we've tried it. Apparently, there's not, from what they see on the officer activity log side. But you know, in the community policing, see, that's where they put that. If they done a presentation for a daycare or a training at the school, if they taught a class at school, they put that in their officer activity log, so it wouldn't be mapped.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's just not math. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe they need to, Southern Software put an address field in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
You know,
That'd be
all of these vendors, Crime Reports and even Southern Software, have this huge problem where there are 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. Each one does business their own unique way, has their own specific wants and desires. And then as a developer or programmer, you've got the task of developing a program, like in that general to specific, that meets their needs, but meets the needs of everybody and some kind of lowest common denominator. So I don't know what the workaround for all of that is, but the good news is databases perform logical sequential processes that can be replicated. So, you know, maybe it is a Southern Software solution.
Well, we're very impressed with Crime Report so far. I have been, and the iPhone application is great also, you know, for the public.
Right.
To see, and we were looking for, you know, maybe a BlackBerry or Android application coming soon, so we can really promote this thing. I mean, it's a great PR tool.
Yeah. No, I agree. And what I found, it really becomes a, like you said, sell it. The public version too is it really becomes a. I'm starting to wonder if perhaps law enforcement doesn't need to start looking at hiring public marketing employees as a way to communicate better to the public rather than just what we're doing now, because I don't think it's very effective. I think we need to start looking at really marketing the agency with the public. So, anywho.
Well, that's about what you have to do to hang on to your manpower and your budget. I mean, and times are bad, and people start really drilling down and wondering what exactly your agency does. Why do you need these officers? Why do you need this many cars? Why do you need this much training? You know, and this is just a great tool to go in to the budget process or the community forums with some real numbers, you know, some backup.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to give everyone my email address, and if there's any questions at any time about anything, please contact me. I can be reached at Corey.Beyer, which is CORY.BEYER @crimereports.com. And I have a real job on the weekdays, but I can always make myself available, and it oftentimes becomes difficult to schedule training. So if you want to do private training just like this, we did it today, then email me and we can schedule something out. It's kind of just easier that way for me to do it. So, but I'm here to help. And are there any other questions? I don't mean to cut anybody off or. No?
We'll be in touch. Probably
we'll
be in touch about CompStat.
Okay.
Get some advice from you.
Okay. My knee-jerk reaction is don't do it.
All right.
Or get a team-building exercise first so that we can all, you know, feel good about each other, get some trust, and then start CompStat so we don't start tearing each other up.
All right.
Okay, guys, I really appreciate your time. Y'all have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.